Elena Martinez wiped down the last table at Romano's restaurant, her tired eyes scanning the empty dining room. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., and she was finally alone after another long shift. At 24, she had been working double shifts for 3 months straight, trying to save enough money to pay for her younger brother's medical treatment. The cancer had returned, and the bills were piling up faster than she could earn. She pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear and began counting the tips from her apron pocket. $63. Not bad for a Tuesday night, but still not enough. She needed at least $500 more by the end of the week for Miguel's next chemotherapy session. The restaurant sat in the heart of Little Italy, a neighborhood where old traditions ran deep and everyone knew everyone else's business. Elena had grown up just 6 blocks away, but she had never paid much attention to the rumors about certain establishments in the area. Romano's seemed like any other family restaurant, with its checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic bread that never quite left the air. As she bent to pick up a fallen napkin, she heard the back door creak open. Her heart jumped. Mr. Romano had left hours ago, and she was certain she had locked that door. She straightened slowly, listening to heavy footsteps moving through the kitchen. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Romano, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. Elena felt her pulse quicken as silence filled the restaurant. Maybe it was just the wind, or perhaps Mr. Romano had forgotten something and returned. She tried to convince herself of these innocent explanations as she moved toward the kitchen, but every instinct told her to run. She pushed through the swinging doors and froze. 3 men in expensive suits stood around the stainless steel prep table. They weren't there to steal food or money. These men carried themselves with a confidence that spoke of power and danger. The oldest one, a man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, looked up at her with mild annoyance. "Well, this complicates things," he said in a voice that carried a slight Italian accent. Elena's mouth went dry. She recognized that voice from the news reports she had seen over the years. Vincent Torino, the man police had been trying to build a case against for decades. He was rumored to control most of the illegal activities on the East Coast, but no charges had ever stuck. And now he was standing in the kitchen where she made minimum wage plus tips. "I was just closing up," Elena managed to say, taking a small step backward. "I didn't see anything." The second man, younger with dark hair and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, laughed quietly. "She didn't see anything, boss. How convenient." Torino studied Elena with those penetrating blue eyes. She felt as though he was reading her entire life story just by looking at her. The third man, built like a linebacker with hands the size of dinner plates, moved to block the door she had come through. "What's your name, girl?" Torino asked. "Elena Martinez," she answered, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Elena Martinez," he repeated slowly, as if testing how the name felt in his mouth. "And how long have you been working here, Elena Martinez?" 6 months, she said. "I'm just a waitress. I serve food and clean tables. I don't know anything about anything else." Torino walked around the prep table, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the tiled floor. "You see, Elena, we were having a private meeting, a very important discussion about business matters, and now you've seen our faces. You know we were here." Elena's hands began to shake. She had heard stories about what happened to people who witnessed things they shouldn't have in this neighborhood. Bodies found in the river. Families who suddenly moved away in the middle of the night. People who simply disappeared. "I won't say anything," she said quickly. "I swear on my brother's life, I won't tell anyone anything. I didn't even see you here." The mention of her brother seemed to catch Torino's attention. "Your brother? Tell me about your brother, Elena." She hesitated, unsure why he wanted to know, but afraid to refuse answering. "He's 17. He has leukemia." I work here to pay for his treatment. Torino nodded slowly, as if this information fit into some larger puzzle he was solving in his mind. And your parents? They died in a car accident 3 years ago, Elena said, her voice growing smaller. It's just Miguel and me now. The scarred man whispered something to Torino, who waved him away with irritation. Elena noticed that they had been examining documents spread across the prep table. But from her angle, she couldn't make out what they were. Elena, Torino said finally, you find yourself in a very difficult position. You've seen something you shouldn't have seen. You know something you shouldn't know. In my line of work, this creates what we call a problem. Elena felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to break down now. Miguel was counting on her. Please, she whispered. I have to take care of my brother. He needs me. Torino continued his slow walk around the kitchen, picking up a chef's knife and examining its edge. There are typically 2 ways to solve a problem like this, the permanent way and the complicated way. Elena's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to remain standing. She thought about Miguel, probably asleep in their tiny apartment, trusting that his big sister would find a way to keep him alive. She thought about the picture of their parents on the kitchen table and how disappointed they would be if she gave up now. But you intrigue me, Elena Martinez, Torino continued. You work multiple jobs to save your brother's life. You grew up in this neighborhood, but you stay out of trouble. You mind your own business. These are admirable qualities. The large man by the door checked his watch and gave Torino a meaningful look. Elena sensed that whatever decision was going to be made about her fate, it would happen soon. Torino set down the knife and walked over to stand directly in front of her. He was shorter than she had expected, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, but his presence filled the room. I'm going to offer you a choice, Elena. You can forget you ever saw us here tonight, walk out that door, and never work at this restaurant again, or... He paused, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. Or? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the alternative. Or you can come work for me, Torino said. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands the value of loyalty and discretion. Someone who has something important to lose if they betray that trust. Elena stared at him in shock. She had expected threats, violence, or worse. But a job offer? I don't understand, she said. I run several legitimate businesses, Elena. Restaurants, construction companies, import operations. They all need reliable employees who can follow instructions and keep their mouths shut. The pay would be significantly better than what you earn here. The scarred man looked surprised by his boss's offer, but he said nothing. The large man continued to watch the door. What kind of work? Elena asked cautiously. Administrative duties, answering phones, keeping track of schedules and appointments, nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just the kind of work that requires absolute discretion. Elena's mind raced. The money would solve her immediate problems with Miguel's medical bills, but she would be working for a man that law enforcement considered one of the most dangerous criminals in the country. What would happen if she disappointed him? What would happen if the FBI came asking questions? I need time to think about it, she said. Torino smiled for the first time since she had discovered them in the kitchen. It wasn't a warm smile. Time is a luxury you don't have, Elena. You decide right now, or I decide for you, and I promise you won't like my decision as much as your own. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about Miguel's thin face and the hope in his eyes when she told him about each new treatment option. She thought about the stack of medical bills on her kitchen table and the calls from debt collectors that she had stopped answering. If I say yes, she said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word about the work being legitimate? You have my word, Torino said simply. In my world, that means everything. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Elena realized that whatever choice she made in the next few seconds would change the course of her entire life. There would be no going back to serving coffee and clearing tables, no matter what she decided. She looked at Torino's cold blue eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. He was giving her a choice, and he seemed genuinely interested in her answer. "What would my first assignment be?" she asked. "Smart question," Torino said approvingly. "Tomorrow night there's a meeting at one of my restaurants. Important people will be there, and they'll need someone to serve drinks and take notes, someone who can be invisible when necessary and trustworthy always." Elena nodded slowly. "And the pay?" $500 for one evening's work. Elena's eyes widened. That was more than she made in 2 weeks at Romano's. It was exactly what she needed for Miguel's treatment. "I'll do it," she said, before she could change her mind. Torino nodded as if he had expected this answer all along. "Excellent. Marco here will give you the details." He gestured to the scarred man. "And, Elena, from this moment forward, you work for me. That means your loyalty is to me and to no one else. Do you understand what that means?" Elena nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she did understand. She was about to find out that working for Vincent Torino meant entering a world where the rules were different, where loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished in ways she couldn't imagine. "Good," Torino said. He picked up the documents from the prep table and handed them to the large man. "Clean this up, and make sure Mr. Romano knows that his restaurant served its purpose tonight." As the 3 men prepared to leave, Torino turned back to Elena one last time. "One more thing. Elena, you might want to find your brother better medical care than whatever clinic you've been using. I know some very good doctors who specialize in pediatric oncology. Doctors who don't ask too many questions about how their bills get paid." With that, he walked out the back door, leaving Elena alone in the kitchen with her racing thoughts and the smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air. She stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. She had come to work that night worried about making rent. Now she was employed by one of the most powerful crime bosses in the country, with promises of money she desperately needed and medical care that could save her brother's life. Elena looked around the familiar kitchen one last time, knowing she would never see it again. Tomorrow, her new life would begin. She just hoped she was strong enough to survive it. Elena spent the entire next day questioning her decision. She sat beside Miguel's hospital bed, watching him sleep after his latest chemotherapy session, and wondered what their parents would think about the choice she had made. The $500 for one night's work seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But when the medical bills arrived in the afternoon mail, totaling over $8,000 for the month, she knew she didn't have any other options. The insurance company had denied coverage for the experimental treatment that Dr. Peterson said might give Miguel his best chance at survival. At 6:30 that evening, Elena stood outside Bella Vista, an upscale Italian restaurant in the financial district. It was nothing like Romano's, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. This was the kind of place where a single meal cost more than she used to make in a day. Marco, the scarred man from the night before, appeared beside her so quietly that she jumped. "You're early," he said approvingly. "Mr. Torino likes punctuality." "I didn't want to be late," Elena said, smoothing down her black dress. It was the nicest thing she owned, bought for her parents' funeral 3 years ago. "Good. Tonight you'll be serving drinks to some very important people. They'll be discussing business matters that you'll pretend not to understand, even if you do understand them. Your job is to be invisible unless someone needs something." Marco led her through the restaurant's back entrance and into a private dining room that had been set up for 12 people. The table was set with gold-rimmed china and crystal glasses, that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. "The guests will arrive at 7, Marco explained, showing her where the bar had been set up in the corner. "Serve only what they ask for. Don't volunteer conversation. Don't ask questions. And most importantly, never, ever repeat anything you hear tonight to anyone. Not your brother, not your friends, not a priest in confessional, no one." Elena nodded, her mouth dry with nervousness. "What if someone asks me a question?" "Answer politely and briefly. These men respect competence and discretion." Marco checked his watch. "Mr. Torino will be here in a few minutes. He'll want to see that you're ready." As if summoned by his words, Vincent Torino entered the private dining room. He looked different than he had the night before, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Elena's car. His silver hair was styled impeccably, and he moved with the confidence of a man who owned everything around him. "Elena," he said, acknowledging her with a nod. "You look professional. Good." "Thank you, Mr. Torino," she replied, standing straighter. He walked over to examine the bar setup, checking the bottles of wine and whiskey that had been arranged. "Tonight's guests include some of the most powerful men in the city. Politicians, judges, business leaders. They come here because they know their conversations will remain private. Your role in maintaining that privacy is crucial." Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I understand." "I hope you do," Torino said, his blue eyes studying her intently. "Because the people coming tonight don't forgive mistakes. They don't give second chances. They don't show mercy to those who disappoint them." Before Elena could respond, Marco announced that the first guests were arriving. Torino straightened his tie and transformed before Elena's eyes, from a criminal giving warnings to a charming host preparing to entertain friends. The men who filed into the dining room over the next 20 minutes were exactly what Torino had described. Elena recognized several faces from newspaper headlines and television news reports. A federal judge who had been nominated to the Supreme Court. A construction company CEO who had built half the skyscrapers in the city. A police commissioner who had been fighting organized crime for decades. Elena felt dizzy as she realized that the same police commissioner who appeared on television talking tough about the war on organized crime was shaking hands and laughing with Vincent Torino like they were old friends. "Scotch, neat," the first guest said to her, settling into his chair without really looking at her face. "Red wine," said another. "Something Italian." Elena moved efficiently between the bar and the table, serving drinks and trying to remain invisible as the conversation began. At first, they talked about safe topics, sports, the weather, their families. But as the wine flowed and they grew more comfortable, the real business began. "The harbor project is moving forward," said a man Elena recognized as the mayor's chief of staff. "All the permits are approved. Construction starts next month." "Excellent," Torino said, raising his glass. "And the labor contracts?" "Signed and sealed. Your people will have all the work they can handle for the next 2 years." Elena refilled wine glasses and tried to process what she was hearing. These weren't just social acquaintances of Torino's. They were business partners. They were all in on whatever illegal activities were happening, from politicians to police officials to judges. "What about the federal investigation?" asked the police commissioner, lowering his voice slightly. "Under control," Torino replied smoothly. "Agent Rodriguez thinks he's close to something, but he's chasing shadows. The information he's been given will lead him in circles for months." Elena's hand trembled slightly as she poured wine for the federal judge. These people weren't just corrupt. They were actively working to undermine law enforcement investigations. They were feeding false information to FBI agents and manipulating the justice system from the inside. "The casino license?" asked another man. "Approved last week," said someone Elena recognized as a state senator. "The grand opening is scheduled for New Year's Eve." As the evening progressed, Elena began to understand the scope of Torino's operations. He didn't just run illegal gambling and loan sharking businesses. He had legitimate enterprises throughout the state, all protected by a network of corrupt officials who ensured that investigations never succeeded and competitors never got the permits they needed to challenge his dominance. Around 10 o'clock, the conversation shifted to a topic that made Elena's blood run cold. "What about the Martinez situation?" asked Marco, who had been silent for most of the evening. Elena froze in the middle of clearing empty glasses from the table. They were talking about her. "Resolved," Torino said calmly. "Miss Martinez has proven herself to be exactly what we hoped: intelligent, discreet, and motivated by the right incentives." The federal judge looked up at Elena with new interest. "She's the waitress from Romano's?" "Former waitress," Torino corrected. "She works for me now." Elena felt 12 pairs of eyes studying her as she continued clearing the table, trying to act as though she wasn't listening to every word. "Is that wise?" asked the police commissioner. "Bringing in someone new, especially someone with no family connections to our world?" Torino leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Elena's brother is dying of cancer. She needs money for his treatment, and we need someone who can move through the legitimate world without attracting attention. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." "And if she becomes a problem?" asked the mayor's chief of staff. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Torino's voice became very quiet, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. "Elena is not going to become a problem. Are you?" "Elena?" She looked up from the glasses she was stacking and met his gaze directly. "No, sir. I'm not." "Good," he said, his voice returning to its normal conversational tone. "Because Elena understands that her brother's life depends on her continued loyalty and discretion." The threat was delivered so casually that it took Elena a moment to process it fully. He wasn't just threatening her job or her safety. He was threatening Miguel. Her 17-year-old brother, who was fighting for his life in a hospital bed, had just become leverage to ensure her silence. Elena felt anger building in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't afford to show emotion now, not in front of these people who clearly thought of human lives as business assets. The meeting continued for another hour, covering topics from drug distribution routes to political campaign funding. Elena served coffee and dessert while learning more about organized crime operations than most FBI agents ever discovered. As the guests began to leave, each one shook Torino's hand and nodded politely to Elena. The police commissioner even complimented her on her professional service, as if she were just a regular employee at an upscale restaurant. When the last guest had gone, Elena began cleaning up the dining room while Marco and Torino settled the bill with the restaurant manager. She stacked dishes and wiped down the table, trying to process everything she had witnessed. "You did well tonight," Torino said, appearing beside her as she finished packing up the unused glasses. "Thank you," Elena replied carefully. He handed her an envelope. "500 as promised, plus a bonus for your discretion." Elena opened the envelope and found $700 in cash, more money than she had ever held at one time in her life. "There's more where that came from," Torino continued. "I have another event next week, a charity fundraiser that needs professional staff. The pay is even better." Elena looked at the money in her hands and thought about Miguel's medical bills. "What kind of charity fundraiser?" Torino smiled. "The kind where wealthy people donate money to look good in front of their friends, and I get to meet potential new business partners, very legitimate, very public, very profitable for everyone involved. And after that? After that, we'll see how things develop. You might be surprised by how many opportunities open up for someone with your skills." Elena folded the envelope and put it in her purse. "What exactly are my skills, Mr. Torino?" You're intelligent enough to understand what you see and hear, but smart enough to keep your mouth shut about it. You're desperate enough to take risks, but not reckless enough to do anything stupid. And most importantly, you have something valuable that I can threaten if you ever disappoint me." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "My brother." "Your brother," Torino confirmed. "Who, by the way, has an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen at Memorial Hospital next Tuesday. She's one of the best pediatric oncologists on the East Coast. She's also very expensive, but she's agreed to treat Miguel at no cost as a favor to me." Elena stared at him in shock. "You already arranged for Miguel to see a specialist?" "I told you I take care of my employees," Torino said. "Dr. Chen will have access to experimental treatments that aren't available through normal channels. Treatments that could save your brother's life." Elena felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Torino said seriously. "Dr. Chen's continued cooperation depends on your continued loyalty. If you ever betray my trust, her generous spirit might suddenly disappear." The message was clear. He was saving Miguel's life, and he could just as easily let Miguel die if Elena ever became a problem. "I understand," Elena said. "Good. Marco will drive you home tonight. Tomorrow, you should quit your job at Romano's and any other employment you might have. From now on, you work exclusively for me." As Elena sat in the back seat of Marco's expensive car, 20 minutes later, watching the city lights blur past the window, she realized that her old life was completely over. She was no longer just Elena Martinez, struggling waitress trying to save her brother. She was now Elena Martinez, employee of one of the most powerful crime organizations in the country. The money in her purse could save Miguel's life, but she was beginning to understand that the price of that salvation might be her own soul. She thought about the corrupt police commissioner and the federal judge who took orders from a criminal, and she wondered how long it would be before she became just as compromised as they were. Elena closed her eyes and tried not to think about the fact that she was already looking forward to the next job, the next envelope full of money, the next step deeper into Vincent Torino's world. Because the alternative was watching Miguel die, and she wasn't strong enough to let that happen, even if it meant becoming someone she didn't recognize. 3 months later, Elena Martinez stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her new apartment, applying makeup with hands that no longer shook when she thought about the day ahead. The scared waitress who had discovered Vincent Torino in Romano's kitchen had been replaced by someone harder, more confident, and infinitely more dangerous. The apartment was in a much better neighborhood than the tiny place she had shared with Miguel. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and a view of the harbor. Miguel had his own room for the first time in his life, decorated with posters of his favorite basketball players and equipped with all the medical equipment Dr. Chen said he needed at home. Miguel was responding well to the experimental treatment. His latest blood tests showed improvement that Dr. Chen called remarkable and unprecedented. The cancer was in retreat, and for the first time in years, Elena dared to hope that her brother might actually survive. But the cost of that hope was becoming clearer every day. Elena had worked 8 events for Torino, each one teaching her more about the scope of his criminal empire. She had served drinks while listening to conversations about money laundering schemes that moved millions of dollars through legitimate businesses. She had taken notes during meetings where politicians discussed which laws they could change to benefit Torino's operations. She had smiled politely while federal agents unknowingly shared drinks with the man they were supposed to be investigating. The money was better than anything she had ever imagined. She was earning more in a week than she used to make in 6 months. But every dollar came with strings attached, and those strings were starting to feel like chains. Elena adjusted the collar of her navy blue dress and checked her watch. Today was different from the other events. Today, she was meeting with FBI agent Sarah Rodriguez, the same agent whose investigation Torino had been manipulating for months. 2 weeks ago, Agent Rodriguez had approached Elena outside Miguel's hospital. She had identified herself and asked Elena to come in for questioning about her employment with businesses connected to Vincent Torino. Elena had politely declined, saying she knew nothing about any illegal activities. But Agent Rodriguez was persistent. She had called Elena 3 times and left messages explaining that the FBI was building a case that could put Torino away forever. All they needed was someone on the inside willing to cooperate. Elena had reported these contacts to Marco as she had been instructed to do. She expected him to tell her to avoid the agent completely. Instead, Marco had brought her to meet with Torino personally. Agent Rodriguez is getting close to something important, Torino had explained, sitting behind the desk in his private office above the Bella Vista restaurant. We need to know exactly what she knows and how close she is to proving it. You want me to spy on the FBI agent who's investigating you? Elena had asked. I want you to meet with her and find out what information she has, what evidence she thinks she's found, who else she's talked to, what she's planning to do next. Elena had stared at him in disbelief. You want me to become a double agent? Torino had smiled that cold smile she had learned to fear. I want you to protect your brother's future. Dr. Chen called this morning to discuss Miguel's next round of treatments. Very expensive treatments. Very rare medications. The kind of care that could be withdrawn if certain people became uncooperative. Now, sitting in a small coffee shop downtown, Elena waited for Agent Rodriguez to arrive. She had agreed to the meeting, telling the agent that she was ready to discuss her concerns about her employer. But her real purpose was to gather intelligence for the man she was supposed to be betraying. Agent Rodriguez walked through the door at exactly 2 o'clock. She was younger than Elena had expected, maybe 35, with short brown hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore a simple black suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably contained enough evidence to destroy several lives. Elena, she said, sliding into the booth across from her. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I'm not sure I can help you, Elena said carefully. I really don't know much about Mr. Torino's business operations. Agent Rodriguez ordered coffee and studied Elena's face. You've been working for Vincent Torino for 3 months. In that time, you've attended at least 8 private meetings involving some of the most powerful people in the state. You've seen things, Elena. You've heard conversations. Elena felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression neutral. I serve drinks and take notes about catering arrangements. That's all. That's not all, Rodriguez said firmly. We have photographs of you entering and leaving venues where we know illegal activities were being discussed. We have financial records showing payments to you from shell companies connected to Torino's organization. Elena took a sip of her coffee, buying time to think. Torino had prepared her for this conversation, but sitting across from a federal agent who clearly knew more than she was letting on made Elena nervous. What do you want from me? Elena asked finally. I want you to help us put Vincent Torino in prison where he belongs, Rodriguez said. I want you to wear a wire to his meetings and record the conversations. I want you to help us gather the evidence we need to shut down his entire organization. Elena pretended to consider this proposal while actually trying to memorize every word Rodriguez was saying. Why would I do that? Mr. Torino has been good to me. He helped my brother get medical treatment. Because Vincent Torino is using your brother's illness to control you, Rodriguez said bluntly. He's not helping Miguel out of kindness. He's using him as leverage to ensure your loyalty. That's not generosity, Elena. That's manipulation. Elena felt a flash of anger, partly because Rodriguez was right, and partly because hearing the truth spoken out loud made it impossible to ignore. My brother is alive because of Mr. Torino's help. Your brother could get the same treatment through legitimate channels if you cooperate with us. The FBI has resources. We can protect witnesses and their families. We can make sure Miguel continues to receive the best possible care. Rodriguez reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. I'm going to show you something, Elena. But first, I need you to understand that what I'm about to share with you is classified information that could get people killed if it falls into the wrong hands. Elena nodded, though her loyalty was entirely to the wrong hands already. Rodriguez opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed Vincent Torino meeting with a man Elena didn't recognize, but the timestamps indicated the photos were taken just 2 weeks ago. Do you know who that man is? Rodriguez asked, pointing to the stranger. Elena shook her head. His name is Carlos Mendoza. He runs the largest human trafficking operation on the East Coast. He sells young girls to wealthy clients who prefer their companions very, very young. Elena felt sick to her stomach. What does that have to do with Mr. Torino? Torino is Mendoza's business partner. He provides protection and logistics for the trafficking operation. Some of those girls are as young as 13, Elena. They're kidnapped from their families and sold like merchandise. Rodriguez pulled out more photos, showing young girls being moved through what looked like a warehouse. Elena recognized the building. It was one of Torino's legitimate businesses, a shipping company that moved cargo through the harbor. This is what you're protecting when you stay silent, Rodriguez continued. This is what your loyalty is supporting, children being sold into sexual slavery. Elena stared at the photos, feeling her carefully constructed justifications crumbling around her. She had told herself that Torino's crimes were victimless, or at least that the victims were other criminals who knew the risks they were taking. But these were children. Innocent children who looked like they could be Miguel's classmates. I didn't know, Elena whispered. Now you do, Rodriguez said gently. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Elena closed her eyes, thinking about Miguel laughing as he played video games in his new bedroom, thinking about Dr. Chen's optimistic reports about his treatment progress, thinking about the money in her bank account that had bought them both a future she had never dared to dream about. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the photographs again. A girl who couldn't be older than 14 stared back at her with eyes that held no hope at all. What would you need me to do? Elena asked quietly. Rodriguez leaned forward. We need you to attend Torino's next meeting wearing a recording device. We need documentation of him discussing the trafficking operation. We need evidence that will hold up in court. And if I do this, you can protect Miguel? You can make sure he continues getting treatment? I give you my word, Rodriguez said. The federal government will ensure that Miguel receives the best possible medical care, regardless of what happens to Vincent Torino. Elena thought about Torino's cold blue eyes and his casual threats. She thought about Marco's scar and the rumors about what happened to people who betrayed the organization. She thought about Miguel, trusting his big sister to keep him safe. There's a meeting tomorrow night, Elena said finally. A dinner at the Regency Hotel. Torino said it was important business with out-of-town partners. Rodriguez nodded. That's perfect. We can fit you with a recording device that's completely undetectable. You'll be in and out in a few hours, and we'll have everything we need. Elena took a shaky breath. What happens to me after tomorrow night? You disappear, Rodriguez said simply. New identities for both you and Miguel. New location. Federal protection until after the trial, and witness relocation afterward. You'll both be completely safe. And if something goes wrong? If they find the recording device? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then you need to run, and you need to run fast. Because Vincent Torino doesn't forgive betrayal, and he doesn't leave witnesses. Elena nodded, understanding the full scope of the risk she was taking. If everything went according to plan, she and Miguel would be free of Torino forever, with new lives and a legitimate way to pay for Miguel's continued treatment. If something went wrong, They would both be dead before morning. "I'll do it," Elena said. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since sitting down. "You're doing the right thing, Elena. Those children in the photographs deserve justice, and you're the only one who can give it to them." As Elena walked home from the coffee shop, she felt lighter and more terrified than she had in months. Tomorrow night, she would either save those children and free herself from Torino's control, or she would die trying. Either way, her life as Vincent Torino's employee would be over. She stopped at Miguel's hospital for his evening treatment and found him sitting up in bed, color in his cheeks that hadn't been there in years. The experimental medications were working. He was going to live. "How was your day?" Miguel asked as she sat down beside his bed. "It was good," Elena said, taking his hand. "Tomorrow's going to be even better." Miguel smiled, trusting his sister completely. Elena squeezed his hand and silently promised him that no matter what happened tomorrow night, she would find a way to keep him safe, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. Because some things were worth more than money, more than security, more than her own life. And Miguel's future was one of them. Just like those children in Agent Rodriguez's photographs deserved a future too. Elena Martinez had spent 3 months becoming someone she didn't recognize. Tomorrow night, she was going to find out if she still had enough of her original self left to do the right thing, even when it meant risking everything she had worked so hard to build.